accept them.
Move to accept. Do we have a second? Bruce, all in favor? Okay, looks like it's unanimous.
I'm going to welcome our city manager, Harold Dominguez. I know you all expressed an interest in understanding a little bit better how the museum is funded, and particularly as the museum's going into expansion, understanding options for making sure the museum operations are sufficiently funded once that expansion has opened. And Harold is extremely familiar with obviously all aspects of the city, and graciously agreed to give us some time to chat a little bit about what he sees, how the museum is currently funded, and also answer any questions that you all have.
Anything you all want me to start with, or any particular question?
I think maybe like how is the museum like being funded now? Like what do you see for the 2025?
Yeah, so I'm going to I'll start back with kind of an overview of this year's budget process. So there's two components to the museum. One is general fund, and the other is we changed the name of it, the grant donation service fund that we built internally. And that was to maximize the SCFD funding that we were getting from the state. So to give you a sense, when we went into the auditorium expansion, they were making a request for some positions. And so we actually utilized the revenue that's generated from the auditorium to fund the positions that they were requesting, because we didn't have the capacity to do that within the general fund budget. The general fund budget is just a hair under 130 million. That's what the museum is in. So when you see our budget, when I say it's a hair under 130 million, about 70% of those expenses are personnel across all of the departments within the general fund budget. So think of a big part of police, fire, planning, children, youth and family services, senior services, library, those types of things. This year's budget process was, the last few actually have been pretty challenging based on the changes that the state's made to property tax. And so over the last couple of years, I think for the 24 budget, based on the changes they made, we held $1 million back because we were forecasting that to be lost in 25, and we treated that as one time. And then for this year's budget, based on their changes, our projection is that we're going to lose $1.6 million going into the 26 budget. So we held that back for one-time funding as well, because we didn't want to allocate ongoing expenses to money that we knew was not going to be present in the following year. In terms of the museum,
the overall budget is, the city is like 450.
but that's multiple funds.
Okay.
So the museum is just in the general fund.
Okay.
So we do fund accounting, and many of those funds are, so we have a lot of restrictions on all the other funds, and some are enterprise funds. So we can't move money from an enterprise fund into the general fund. So think of those as being restricted to the use of whatever funding source comes into this. So the general fund is really the only tax-based fund that we have.
Can you give an example of what an enterprise fund is?
Water, wastewater, stormwater, sanitation, golf. We have 60 different funds in our budget. And then even within, we also have the Affordable Housing Fund, the Attainable Housing Fund, and those funds all have restrictions in terms of where the money can be spent. So this budget process was more complicated because we're still facing some so headwinds coming into the budget is obviously the property tax adjustments. Inflation continues to be a major issue for us to deal with in terms of our budget process. And then salaries have continued to grow in the process. This year was a little different in that we also had increases in health insurance. So when we went into the budget process this year, very early on, I communicated to staff to say we are not going to consider any level 2 requests. So when we go through the budget process, a level 1 request is essentially a must-pay bill. So if you think about at home, gas bill, water bill, you have to pay these things. A level 2 request is anything that we need to add. And so we knew based on our revenue estimates that we weren't going to be able to do that based on all the increases that we were seeing. The last few years, we've seen the largest increases in our level 1 expenses, and that's just a direct result of inflation. And it shows itself all over the place. What we also had in this year's budget is we have a public safety fund that people voted on for police and fire. And based on where we were seeing the salaries move in terms of police and fire staff, there was an interesting article on CNN that's probably the fastest moving salary in the nation is for police and firefighters. So we actually had to move three for sure, maybe 4 positions out of the public safety fund into the general fund because of the revenue that was being generated there. And then we still eliminated 3 or 4 positions that were vacant within the public safety fund in order to balance our budget. So, and then on the park side, there's some dedicated funding sources that we had to use to hire some positions, but again, it was dedicated. It's the park maintenance fee.
Yes.
Where we put some park, those were the only new positions that we were added, but we had a dedicated source of funding that was ongoing. So that's a 30,000 foot view of the general fund. Yep, go ahead.
This might be an incredibly naive question, but you talked a lot about the increased costs, but as new developments come online, does the tax base increase and we get more revenue from them, or do they costs outweigh the benefits for?
They do. I think it's what we're waiting to see in 26 is really, so what happened is every 2 years you go through a reappraisal year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 25 budget was not a reappraisal year, so those budget years are pretty slim generally.
Okay.
What we've started doing, historically the city didn't do this. It's like you'd have a year where you were flush and a year where it's tight. What we've started doing is holding back some of the ongoing revenue in years that you're flush, knowing that you're going to have ongoing expenses come. So we've been able to balance that a little bit. What's happened in the last 2 budget cycles is that the changes that the state legislature that they've made to property tax has really kind of made that more difficult because you're balancing a reduction in revenue.
Okay.
And so next year we're going into a reappraisal year. What we don't know is what will it generate based on the adjustments that they made.
Okay.
We're projecting a $1.6 million loss.
Okay.
But he was talking more about the
Yeah.
renters.
Yeah, so as we have new developments coming online, like the ones on Hover behind Target, all that stuff, those generate more revenue, right? Or do they?
Well, it depends what you're looking at. So they pay property tax.
Uh-huh.
And that's where the ratios were adjusted both for commercial and residential property. That's the loss we're projecting.
That's like the whole Gallagher amendment thing that everyone voted on. Okay.
Yeah, that was that piece of it. The other piece is sales tax, and there's so many different components to sales tax that we may see increases in some areas, we may see decreases in other areas. And so coming into December, we were actually lagging a little bit, but we had a really good December. I just got the report. And then use tax is another component of that, and use tax is really volatile. And so use tax, think of things like lumber or large businesses that reinvest in their computer systems and things like that. So the last few years, use tax has been when I say really volatile, because I think what we're finding in some of the commercial spaces is that when interest rates are really high, sometimes companies are reluctant to reinvest in their business because they're making so much money on the interest that they're not going to want to expend the capital. You combine high interest rates with inflation, and then that's just another headwind into that use tax piece. And so that's just a tough thing to manage. We're probably going to shift how we do it and run some Monte Carlo analysis on it to try to get a little bit more fine-tuned and what to expect, so we can take some of the volatility out of it, but that'll probably throttle back a little bit on some of the projections.
So just to make sure, can I rephrase to make sure I understood what you were saying? So a place like the new developments going in on Hover, that land would have been taxed before because it was still land, but now that there's things on it, it'll be taxed more.
Right.
You don't know how much more, and you suspect it's not going to be enough to cover.
We get the numbers from, we get a preliminary projection from the Boulder County assessor in around May. And then we get a projection in August, but their final number doesn't come in until after the budget is done, and then you have all the appeals process that's going on in there.
So on a new development, the people appealing would be the developer, I imagine, or?
Developers, homeowners,
Okay.
yeah, so it's all of the above. So I can't tell you today what that's looking like, but
Okay.
we'll probably know going into the summer. So that's kind of a high level view of the general fund budget. In terms of the museum, in the general fund budget for the museum, the revenue that the museum pulls in is about $250,000, and then we have $1.5 million coming in from general fund expenditures. So about 16% is of the general fund piece of the museum budget is recovered through fees. So there's a significant amount of general fund coming in to offset that. On the auditorium, we have, where we were trying to set those positions to recover some of the cost, we have $206,000 in revenue, but we have $323,000 in expenses, so it's about a 63.58% recovery rate. So the general fund is also contributing on the auditorium as well. So that's generally what's happening with the museum in terms of what the general fund is contributing and where the revenues are going. So I think when people see the revenues go into the general fund, those revenues are moving into the general fund to cover museum expenses. They're not going into the general fund to cover expenses beyond the museum.
So all the revenue that the museum earns through ticket sales and exhibits and auditorium, they go into the general fund, then back into the museum?
The positions are in the museum, or in the general fund. So it's, the museum is a piece of the general fund. So it's going in, but covering the, well, it's not covering the expenses.
Yeah.
The general fund's covering those expenses.
Right.
The difference in that. So I'm talking to a lot of boards and commissions right now because they're all interested in this, and so when we talk to the council, just if you've seen kind of the council goal setting session, it's, or the document we have, you know, if you think of it in terms of the foundation, that's core services. So when you think of core services, you know, you think of planning and development, those types of issues, those types of things that we have to do. Then they put in equity, safety, sustainability. Then they said we want to focus on housing, transportation, early child care, places and amenities, and what we're looking at. And so one of the biggest things coming at us right now is really increased demands for services in the core function of our organization. So when we go into the budget process, almost every year we'll probably see anywhere from $2 to $3 million of level 2 requests, and we may have $1 million to fund those requests. So what happens is we start evaluating what's being requested and what's the need. One of the biggest presses that we have right now that we're facing is actually in our senior service department, where we've made some adjustments to their budget, but in terms of clinician services, and so that's really it touches on life safety, housing, and other issues where we typically try to have a 1 month turnaround in terms of when we touch people. The need increased so much that we went to about a 2 month to 2.5 month turnaround. So we added a position or two to that. We brought it back within a month. And
Well, what does that mean, turn around?
meaning if you come for assistance in housing
I see.
or something like that, we want our clinicians to meet with them within a month.
I see.
So it went out, and what we're seeing is more demand, because as you think about the challenges that we're having with people being able to afford housing and those issues, they're coming for support, whether it's rental assistance, medical assistance, and those issues. So we brought it in, but now it's extending out. We weren't able to do anything.
So is that an increasing trend that you're seeing?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, across the board, one of the biggest pressures that we're seeing in our community is housing.
Yeah.
And if you watch the council meetings, that's been a significant issue. I'm also the interim executive director of the Housing Authority, so we've built some affordable housing projects, and that is probably it's not just a Longmont issue, it's a state and national issue. But to put it in perspective for you all, an affordable house based on AMIs is between $300,000 and $350,000. An attainable workforce house maxes out at about $500,000. That's new construction. If you've looked at new construction in Longmont, non-townhome, I think you're lucky if you find one under $800,000. Most of them are over $1 million. We're seeing the same thing on the rental side, in that finding affordable rental units is an issue. So what ends up happening is departments within our general fund budget we're seeing increased levels of requests for rental assistance and those types of things. So whether it's senior services, children, youth, and family services, or work that we're doing through our CARES program, those numbers are just continuing to go up.
So all the apartment buildings that they're building around town, those are beyond the reach of affordable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, some are and some, yeah. So I think that's what we're trying to do. So it depends. So the inclusionary housing ordinance has a 12% requirement of affordable being built in those units, and so they can either build them in the unit or they can pay a fee in lieu. And if they pay a fee in lieu, then what we do is we actually utilize the fee in lieu to then construct and build affordable units. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the two things. But one of the things that's interesting that we saw in our last housing needs assessment is that there's basically a gap through most of the rental spectrums in the community. And so there's a unique phenomenon happening in that you may not have enough of what they call high-end rental units. So people that can afford to pay those actually drop down a level because that's all they can find. And then here it goes to where what you've done is you've compressed where there's very little on the bottom end. And
so if they didn't build all those extra houses that aren't affordable, it's probably even more expensive. So.
Yeah, and we're starting to see some interesting numbers that probably I've been here 12 years. We're doing some work on it. We're doing some data analysis on it. This is probably the first time since I've been here where we're seeing the increases starting to level out a little bit, which is saying that the increased product is now starting to impact the market a little, but the interesting point is the minute the market catches up, then it does this again. And we're seeing that on housing. So that's driving a lot of issues within our budget when we look at it. So, I'm fully expecting going into this budget process, the libraries have a lot of attention. We haven't really invested a lot in the library. If you've been here a while, you saw the construction. None of that really added anything to the library. That was just to keep it stable and not getting red tagged because the foundation failed. The same thing with the Civic Center, the same thing with safety and justice is there was just a lack of ongoing maintenance for decades that finally showed itself with the tendon popping where we had to invest $25 million, I think, and we got no increased capacity in that. So I'm assuming the library is going to be coming, senior services, the museum, recreation, parks, and so it's really when we see those requests balancing it out, and then we use priority-based budgeting when we look at what we're funding and why and what's the impact that we're doing, that we're trying to achieve to make sure that we're aligning our expenditures with priorities from core services down.
What type of priorities would you say there are currently?
Can you be a little bit more specific?
Well, you said priorities.
Well, you was talking about housing and senior services as being top priority.
Yeah, so we have a lot of times when we go into this, it's pretty simple. It's have to, need to, want to. And so the have tos, think about anything that we're currently doing where the cost of providing that service is increasing. One of the challenges that we've seen in our community has really been with our youth. And you all obviously saw what occurred about a year and a half to 2 years ago where we had a lot of violence with our youth. And so we were seeing a lot of pressures in terms of what we're providing to minimize the public safety impact on this. And so every year something will tend to show itself, but it's really how is that rooted in the core functions and the core services that we have to provide to the city no matter what. And so that's generally how we move through these issues.
Okay.
So how can we as a museum board show you that we align with those city priorities? What is the best way for us to advocate and to show that we do align with some of those priorities?
I think they do. But it's to the point, it's them prioritizing within the priorities.
Sure, but if early childhood issues is one of the ones that the city council has put out there, are there specific ways that we can show that having a new children's gallery is going to meet that, whether that is the fact that it is not affordable for stay-at-home parents to spend a day outside of their own homes with their children. If you go to the WOW Museum, I think it will cost you $40 to do that. That's all, that this is a place where childhood education is being met and those sorts of services. How do we get those priorities to be visible for the council?
I think we, when they present the budget, we just put those within the budget process. I think the challenge with that, if we look at early childhood education, is what we know is there are not enough spots in preschools and places like that. So that's when I say priorities within priorities, in the sense of if you're going to invest $200,000, are you going to invest $200,000 in creating more capacity for childcare that offsets, that gives people the opportunity to take their child somewhere while they work? Or are you putting $200,000 in to where it's something they can visit? Because that's a different thing. When you dissect early child care, what we can tell you, there are not enough people providing child care today to satisfy the needs of people who work. And where they are providing it, it is so expensive that people are making other decisions in terms of what they do. And, you know, we're hearing that from our employers, is that they are struggling at times to hire positions because of the lack of child care slots. So it aligns, but then even within that alignment, you're weighing what are you getting and what's the return that you're getting based on the money that you're putting in and what you're achieving.
Right, and I guess I'm like, how can you guys make a decision on what that priority is? Because like the child who stays home with a parent because that parent quit a job because I worked at Front Range Community College.
Mhm.
I can 100% tell you I had to quit that job when I had children because I never could have made enough to put my child somewhere.
Mhm.
Those children also need enrichment. And so it's saying like we can create preschool spots or we can fund outside enrichment. Like children exist in both of those categories. It doesn't quite make sense to me that one should be funded and not the other, or that there's a way to say that one of those children deserves something that the other one doesn't. I guess like, and I understand like
Yeah.
it's a finite amount of
Yeah.
money, but
Well, right, and then balance it against, do we need to add X number of police officers? Do we need to add X number of clinicians? Do we need to add X? I mean, it's within a category you look at it, but then you're looking at it across the general fund as well in terms of those competing priorities and interests. And you know, I tell people a lot, it's not that we don't want to fund things or we don't want to recommend that we fund things. It's that every budget year there's incredibly hard decisions that we have to make. And it's taking what do you have available to you and what are the needs, and then stacking the needs on that core service perspective, stacking it against have to, need to, want to, and bridging all of these things. So on the park side, you know, one of the things that Jeff's having to deal with is taking that same concept. The council years ago, we said, you know, we're not going to build any new parks unless we can fund the operational costs. The easiest thing to do is to come up with capital dollars to build something. The hardest thing to do is to have the ongoing funding to support that over time. And every budget year it's that kind of decision making and what it looks at based on conversations with the council in terms of priorities and what we're seeing. Also, how do you expand your economic base? Because to your point, you know, good, bad, or indifferent, city budgets across the nation are inherently built on growth. And it's the growth that increases the revenue. You all shop at Costco?
No.
If you don't shop at Costco, part of the reason that was such a big deal for us is everybody thinks it was about the revenue increase, and it was partially. But for Costco, we would have been making budget cuts this year because the new revenue it brought in.
From sales tax revenue.
Sales tax revenue.
Well,
And
Better start
we had
shopping
it
there.
would just over one line.
I like the-
Yeah, so the other.
It would still be there, but we wouldn't get any revenue from it.
Right, so the other side of it, so we knew we needed the revenue.
I don't go there.
Probably the first time in my career from a retail
Whole Foods?
perspective,
Nope.
we knew we needed to make sure that it was in Longmont because the loss in revenue was as significant as the gain in revenue because
Sure, everybody would have crossed the county line.
it would have
You could
gone.
lost your sales tax. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but what happens, there's very few retailers that are destination retailers right now.
Yeah.
IKEA, Costco, it reshaped our retail trade area. we're pretty confident businesses would have moved and left to co-locate with them. We are seeing businesses now interested in coming in because they're here.
What kind of businesses?
I can't tell you.
Well, can you tell us whether it's retail?
It's retail. I mean, so I'm talking about retail right now.
High-end retail?
Or this job.
My in-laws used to run a liquor store, and half their stuff they sold came from Costco. So I'm not saying it's liquor stores, but I'm saying any used to sell stuff. Costco's a wholesaler.
So retail is a different conversation, and that's another headwind right now that I think every city in the United States is facing. Is retail over the last 10 years has been in a really bad way, and there's any number of factors to work through it. Obviously, the internet's part of that, but part of it is if you think about disruptors from a sales tax perspective, about 20 years ago, businesses like Best Buy, Lowe's, Home Depot, Bed Bath & Beyond, they were a significant disruptor in retail. Fast forward to today, the internet and other things became a different disruptor where now you're seeing the original disruptors going out of business. And so when we look at it and we kind of talk about what our retail opportunities are, there's also points in time where if you miss an opportunity, you're not necessarily guaranteed that the opportunity is going to come back to you. So before I got here, they were talking about redeveloping the Twin Peaks Mall. Nothing happened. In the interim, you had Flatirons get built, Orchards get built, and Centera got built. So all of a sudden, those retailers went, now they know where people are coming from. And they're not going to cannibalize themselves by adding additional stores because they did that and they all went bankrupt. So the retail world's shifting, but I do think Costco is resetting our retail trade area. And the question is when are we going to see the full impact of that? I heard today Nordstrom Rack was coming in, and so if you think about
too.
Do what?
We have a Carter's now too.
Right, so if you think about since Costco, you now have a Carter's, you now have Nordstrom Rack, so you're seeing the redefining of the retail trade area, but it's now we need to understand what the revenue potential is in terms of looking at the budget. So I wish I had a better answer for you.
That doesn't sound fun.
It's a constant struggle.
But like when you guys make the decisions, like when you say it's like a have to, want to, like need to, want to, like what are the factors that ratchet it? Because I think there's something about a museum that people associate with like a want to. Like it'd be nice to have culture, but like you need food on the table.
That's kind of it. Like if you're thinking about housing, if you're thinking about life safety supports, whether it's social service, this is what we do. I mean, those things obviously rise to the top. If you think about public safety, that rises to the top. If you think about building integrity and preserving assets, that rises to the top.
But I guess, like, to me, and like I'm on the museum board, so I am passionate about the museum. But I think that there are ways that you can frame it that there are things that the museum provides that are more need to than people realize. Like if we're talking about youth and we're talking about like public safety, and part of public safety is if we have youth violence, what does public safety have to do with that? If we have youth that feel connected to our community, what is the likelihood that we can, through early childhood interventions, make it so that we have fewer issues with youth violence? Like, and it's anecdotal, and then so it doesn't count, I think, as strong data, but like my son does summer camps here. When we go out into the community, multiple times, we went to Olin Farms the other day, someone knew my child by name. And it was because of the connection that he had made here. They knew his name, he was running around, he could easily look like someone who could be trouble, but they knew him and they talked to him and they saw him as part of their community.
Right.
And I think that's something the museum can do. It can tell children, you are a part of our community.
Mhm.
You are valued. You should stay here. You should live here. You should work here. You should put your money back into this community because this is a community that matters to you, and that leads to public safety. That leads to everything else. It's not just a want to, and I think it's easy to call a museum a want to when it can provide something that is a need to or a have to.
Yeah, so I'm going to be a little frank here. I had this conversation with Eric and his staff. I think, and I know this because of community and neighborhood services and work that we've been doing through rewind programs and other things. The population that we need to target, they don't come to the museum. And what I've said to Eric and his staff is, if we want to get that population to engage at a different level, you don't bring them to you, you go out to them. And I think if we're looking at things that, to your point, that start getting at what are we doing, outreach is going to be an incredibly big part of that, because you know, when we look at engaging, and I'm saying this through the cultural brokers that we work with, one of the things that I've gotten very clear-eyed on, whether it's working with neighborhood groups and what we're doing, is we're shifting our model organizationally to where before we expect them to come to us, we're going to the neighborhoods and we're engaging with them, because there's a point, and I've heard this through our cultural brokers, do you feel welcomed in certain areas and certain aspects of our community? And the answer is no, we don't. And it's more than doing an event. It's establishing this real world daily connection with neighborhoods in the community. So what I would say is outreach is an incredible part of it, and if we could partner with that outreach, that's a big thing.
Are you saying that would unlock funding?
Potentially.
Okay. But there's also a chicken and egg problem, right? Because we don't have the funding to do the outreach to then unlock the funding.
Right, I mean, you've got to balance all of that, and you know, this was pre-Eric, so don't blame Eric on this. When we were having issues at Lanyon Park, and we had significant issues with unhoused population, drug use, you name it, we saw it happen in Car Park. You know, that's another have to that we're dealing with. One of the things that we really saw is where we have issues in some of our facilities, or some of our outdoor facilities, is as much when you look at neighborhoods and the utilization of parks, we rarely see issues with parks that are highly utilized. The challenge in that neighborhood is most people work 2 jobs. A lot of kids are staying at home, so there are periods of the day where the park isn't utilized. So I said, I need people to start utilizing the park. I was incredibly frustrated because one of the groups operationally that wouldn't participate in it was a museum. I have been very clear with Jeff that I need every department within the organization participating in outreach in these areas, because A, it helps us stabilize neighborhoods, B, it establishes connections with neighborhoods that we don't have connections with in certain areas, but that's an operational issue. That's for me to handle. And so I would say outreach is a good place to start.
Is that something that the library is also
Yes.
focusing on?
Yeah. Library had activities out there, recreation had activities out there. Eric hasn't had a chance to deal with this. That's why I say don't blame Eric, because we're just now going into the next cycle.
Yeah.
We did do a concert in the Car Park.
Yeah, and we've even talked about how, you know, how do we do concerts in parks? And they said, well, we don't have enough staff. And I said, I'm not asking you to do it all. I just need Justin to schedule a concert. We'll bring recreation staff in, we'll bring community neighborhood services in, we will augment staff to support that connection with other aspects of our organization. It's not all on the museum. And we fundamentally shifted how we operate. So I have taken the approach of, I borrowed this from private side, but if you've ever heard of a center of excellence model, where you bring in the right people who know the information, the experts on the ground. And so now we're structuring ourselves organizationally utilizing center of excellence where we're building cross-functional teams. And that's another aspect that if you wanted to say how do we do this, is how do we build a cross-functional team? How do we partner with the library and the youth center to have events at this facility where we go out and pick kids up at the youth center and bring them here to start introducing them to this facility, and how do we create the welcoming environment. And I say all of this because my wife is a parent at Columbine, and I get feedback daily about things like, well, does the city really care about us? Does our community care? I mean, those are real attitudes in the community. And the more we can work cross-functionally, the easier it is to then fund, because, and people hate to hear this, the ROI is greater. The return on what we're investing is greater. And then we can start collecting data to then start cross-tabbing it against what we're seeing on youth violence to go, this is the improvement. So I would say those are some areas to focus on.
With all the growth that's going on, what other arts and culture establishments does the museum compete with for funding from the city? And are exhibits a have to, need to, or want to?
Well, I don't know if it's, sorry, I don't know if everybody knows me. I'm Jeff Friedner, I'm the Director of Recreation and Culture, so I work real close with Eric.
So you're the one to blame.
Yeah. He's relatively new too,
Yeah.
so.
There was a shift, he wasn't
I've got everybody.
I think to answer your question, it isn't necessarily culture. It's my whole area that I oversee is in this challenge of how do we get up in front of things? How do we participate in the centers of excellence to be able to do these things? And one of the things that Eric and John at the library and Ben Wagner at Recreation is, instead of each one of us individually doing outreach, we really need to work together. So instead of Eric having to send 2 people, if each one of those 3 divisions send a person, it spreads the wealth and has a broader impact. So I think to answer your question is, it's really not just about the culture, but it's recreation, it's the library, all trying to bend Harold's ear to get to the top of the pile, if that makes sense. And I think for our area, and again, the museum is a part of that, the better the 3 of us can work together. We're soon to be 4, with Parks being a part of Parks Wrecking Culture in the near future. That I think with those combinations, we can have a broader impact that gets us more to the need to and have to categories.
Gotcha.
Since I've been here, so I will be here 13 years in April. And part of what you're dealing with is history. So when I got here and I was interviewing for the job, one of the things that I saw in the budget that was interesting to me is that when 08 hit, so 08, the world collapsed on every city. What we did in my community is we made really strategic cuts. We didn't necessarily do that here, and it wasn't a staff issue. It was, I can't remember, I wasn't here, so I don't know what happened, but what they ended up doing was funding ongoing requirements with one-time dollars. So that's like a budget no-no. So starting out, we're like, we need to do a budget reset. And the estimate was $3 million. It turned out to be $4 million, $4.25 million. So that was new revenue coming into the system that we were basically just putting into things that we were already doing across the organization because we had to get the one-time funds out of the mix on ongoing expenses. That took us about 5 years to correct. So what it meant was we didn't have those ongoing dollars to put into expanded level services. A year and a half later, the flood hit, which literally hit in the middle of the budget process. So we had to go to the council and say, we need to scrap this. And we had to redo the budget in about a month so that we could generate the revenue necessary for the recovery process, of which we're still in, but we're starting to hit the tail end of this or get out of it. Well, we're still in recovery, then you have COVID hit, which then understanding what that was going to mean to the budget, which then inherently created the salary, out of control salary increases that we're dealing with and the competition for jobs. So I joke about the fact that I've been here 13 years, but I've only had 1.5 years of not having a natural disaster or some type of pandemic to deal with. And so I think those are some of the things that we had to balance coming into this. I think we're at the point where we're getting out of it. One of the things that hit me is last year when I was, we were in budget process, we're just now starting to hit pre-2008 staffing levels. So it's taken us that long to kind of rebuild the system and what we were doing. So there's a lot of variables.
Longmont have in 2008?
Do what?
How many people did Longmont have in 2008, population-wise?
Probably 85 or so.
That's crazy.
And so yeah, if we didn't have the changes in property tax over the last 2 years, the budget would have been much different. You know, it is what it is. We deal with it. But I think we're getting close, and you know, we'll see this reappraisal year. I mean, we've had enough growth that maybe it overshoots what the impact is based on the property tax reductions, that we have a little more room in this budget process. We have got to figure out staffing for the museum based on the capital project and what we're going to do. To be frank, it's probably going to take us a few years.
One of the questions that we had as a board, and you talked about this a little bit, is that it seems, well, it's my understanding, and maybe other people's understanding, that some of the revenue that's generated by the museum goes to the general fund for other purposes. No, it all goes to general fund, then plowed back.
Paying for museum expenses.
Okay, all right. So some of it is not seized and redirected elsewhere.
No, I pulled the financials. That's what I was pulling up.
Okay, well that's interesting.
So we get more than we make.
You actually,
Yeah,
the general fund's
course.
putting more in than you're putting in. Unlike Jeff, so to talk about Jeff, when we look at recreation, your cost recovery requirement is 80%. So for all of his expenses, by city financial policy, he has to recover 80% of that through his revenues.
Oh, wow.
And so the museum doesn't have that same strategy.
And you don't want it.
We don't want
No.
We would
Can
not
I ask a
exist.
question?
Yeah.
To point the spotlight on the other kind of end of the spectrum, is there any data that shows that those higher end earners who live in those 1.5 and beyond $1 million properties and paying quite a lot of property taxes are choosing Longmont because the museum is offering cultural opportunities that they would only be able to get in Boulder or somewhere where there's like a college?
There's a college here, just for the record.
Well,
No, there's
you know,
not.
Boulder's only 12 miles down the road, so it's, you know, I moved here from the East Coast, and to me, Boulder and Longmont are practically the same community. I mean, it's such a short drive that it's an odd thing because Boulder is sitting there by itself, and its real estate prices are like San Francisco, and 12 miles down the road you got Longmont, and the housing prices are expensive here. They're like 50% of what they are in Baltic.
Yeah.
It's
Although I rarely go down to Boulder these days because there's so much here. I like rarely go to Boulder.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm
Yeah.
the same
But
way.
if you want to go to Boulder, it's only
Yeah.
15, 20-minute drive. It's just nothing.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a nexus there because I think really the driver's housing costs and
Yes, I think that's
what's
right.
available. Because Longmont's the most affordable community in Boulder County, so I get the housing numbers.
Yeah.
Louisville, Lafayette, Superior, Erie.
Erie's more fun than Boulder?
I think the last time their new construction. Their new
Lions.
construction.
Yeah, Lions.
Now, Longmont's numbers are a little bit different because you have to take in the older housing stock.
Yeah.
And so they're running some numbers for me now to see what's the difference in the housing cost for new construction versus older stock. Not to get too lost in housing, but what's happening in the older stock is you may have a house for $300. People are buying it for $300 but getting a loan for $400 to $450. And so the $300,000 house now becomes a $500,000 house.
Mm-hmm.
People are, if they can find it $400 to $600, maybe adding $200,000 to $300,000 to their loan to rehab it. So there is going to be a point in time where the reckoning is going to show itself. Which is why if you haven't heard about it and you have friends that want to buy an affordable or attainable housing, we partnered on a project called True North. And so we're building 185 for sale, permanently deed restricted affordable housing units. Those will be between 3 and 350, and then 150 units attainable that'll be from 350 to I think 475. And so if you know anybody, have them look up True North, get on the interest list.
It's right down here, right?
Yeah, it's right down here because on April 26th, it's going to go live on the interest list, and first come, first serve.
I was going to ask how you determine who gets
Yeah.
the affordable housing. Okay. And then there's income limits, obviously, right?
Yeah, there's income limits and all that information, and we're partnering on that. But
Where is that? The True North.
near Costco,
Oh,
it's going to be right next to Costco.
Oh, it's going to be in that area
Yeah.
because we have Habitat for. I live in Riverbend, so
Right.
we have Habitat for Humanity going up the houses,
Yeah,
and the houses that are already going up are about 650.
right.
And then across is the farmhouse apartments,
Mhm.
which are like what 2,000-3,000 a month.
Yeah, I think so. They actually did build affordable on site, so they're affordable
What is the
units.
percentage? Because I remember the title something where you could come in.
12%.
12. Okay. Because I think we need more than that.
I just want you all to know, it's, when we talk about this, to put it in perspective, it's easier for me to cut a budget
Right.
than to deal with a budget where you have revenues and then you're having to make decisions on what you're adding, because nothing that's being requested is a bad request. Everything is a perfectly legitimate request. You're then getting down to very specific details and what you're trying to do. Every group that I talk to, every time I look at the list, I'm like, I fund all of it. Unfortunately, we're limited.
What things can you fund from the grant donation service fund?
Well, this is where I think we can fund almost anything. It depends whether or not it's one-time funds, ongoing funds, whether it's a grant. I mean, we typically, if you fund positions, and it's one-time funding, so that shows itself in grants or just money that we have available for one time, those are term-limited positions. Because we don't want to give applicants the sense that the job is there in perpetuity when we know we don't have the funding. And we have done that at times. One of the things we actually did at the museum is the museum was paying for some of the, or I think all of the communications positions. We actually dropped general fund dollars into that position to remove that cost for the museum and the revenue piece. Now, what does it mean for the museum? It means they have to do other general fund stuff, but we were offsetting some expenses with that.
Okay, but like looking at like needing more positions at the museum as the expansion happens, like is that a way that it could be like a
Potentially, I mean, the
to deal
details
with
matter on that.
Okay.
I mean, the details matter in terms of what's the funding source, what does that look like. But no, we've said that, one of the things we'll press Eric on is what do we think the revenue generation is going to be with the expansion, because the revenue generation is the easiest first step to go. If you think you're going to increase your revenue by $200,000, then we'll grab that 200.
Well, one of the problems that the museum has is the inflation of the exhibits, for instance.
Yeah.
So they can't keep up with the inflation. They can't generate generate the revenue because they won't attract the public into exhibits they can't afford.
Well, I mean, that's how you look at what exhibits do you bring in. Bring a Lego exhibit in every year.
Oh, God,
You're certainly.
Well, that's
and that's
the
basically what the children's gallery.
Yeah.
It's not a Lego exhibit, but it's.
Well, the cost of that is
Yeah.
if they can't keep up with the inflation of affording to bring in these exhibits, and they're not going to get the public in, they're not going to generate the revenue.
Yeah, like what I would do is look at what is the revenue potential based on the exhibits that you're considering bringing in. When I was in Lubbock, the city of Lubbock partnered with the Texas Tech Museum, and they brought in a series of, I forgot what they were called, but they were the ancient religious, that came from the Vatican, ancient religious images that were taken off the walls of churches. They brought people from around the nation into that. So as you're thinking about what are you programming, you think about, well, what's the revenue potential and what you're bringing in, and then you're balancing it with some of the other stuff so that you're also working the revenue side of the equation.
Naive question on, you were just talking about one-time costs versus ongoing costs. Is there a way to bridge that through something like an endowment? Like could the Friends Museum raise $1 million and the interest on that funds this position?
Yes.
In perpetuity.
Answer is yes.
Okay.
I've done that before, and it works. Man, it would have been great the last 5 years. When interest rates are 6%, or 5%. But yeah, you could do that too. And that's actually, I think a lot of museums utilize endowments for that, where you use the interest earnings to generate the ongoing revenue for some of the operating expenses.
It's probably less exciting from a Joey's perspective, than being like, I get to fund a children's wing, instead you're like, I'm throwing money in a pot that will pay for things. But
Yeah. Museums that do that often will do a combined capital campaign and endowment campaign.
Okay.
So kind of give you a sense on the budget. So, we've been working with the council, and again, it's housing, but some things that have adjusted in the budget. So our Health and Human Service Fund, which is which board is that, Susie? What's the name of that board?
Housing and Human Services.
The Human Services Board.
Yeah.
What they were finding
The advisory board.
The advisory board, they were finding that the requests coming in from nonprofits in the community were far exceeding. So at the time, we were putting 2% of general fund revenue into health and human service funding. I think it's 2, maybe 2.25. But we then increased the ongoing funding that comes off the top into health and human service to 3%. And that's money that then the board allocates to various nonprofits in the community to deal with many of the issues I talked about. So that was an additional pull down on ongoing revenue. We created the Affordable Housing Fund, which is $1 million a year of ongoing. It was $1 million a year of ongoing revenue. And then council created the Attainable Housing Fund, and The way we did it is we seeded it with one-time money, but then we incrementally built into ongoing funding to do that. This year, we had to pull back on the attainable housing fund and use one-time funding and reduce the amount of ongoing funding in order to balance the budget.
Is Longmont built out?
No.
No.
But we have very few spaces left for what you would consider large-scale development that you see in other communities.
Well, that doesn't bode well.
Well, that's part of the right sizing of the budget, because we can't, and this is what we're working on with the council, is really shifting to where we're not just totally reliant on growth. Now, redevelopment will always be an opportunity in what we're looking at. And I think there's some big opportunities still out there, but obviously there's a reason it hasn't developed, because it's the most complicated, the most expensive.
That
Sugar factory,
Yeah.
sugar mill.
I have to say, that's a fascinating structure.
I just left a meeting
I
on
kinda
that.
love it.
Yeah, I know, me too.
It's a little sketch.
Well, to kind of give
Scary
you
inside.
a perspective on that, there's probably 50-ish million in remediation on that project.
Right.
But kind of have to, back to the have to, want to. We also know that it's creating a significant ongoing expense from a public safety standpoint, and community impact.
That asbestos doesn't burn. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it doesn't burn. And somebody said, "Why don't you just tear it down?" I'm like, "You still have to spend the 30 to 50 million to remove the asbestos before you tear it down."
Right.
So, the council's directed us to work on this, but, that's an example of what you were getting at, is when you evaluate it, well, do you want to put this much money into it? Well, what are the costs that we're experiencing as a community? And I can tell you, we've had deaths, we've had large-scale pill seizures, we've had fires, we have a lot of theft in that area of the community that's generated out of that area, so there's a community cost to it that we have to figure out. And there's ways to do it, but what you want to do is do it in a way that it also generates other revenue streams that then can be funneled back.
Building aside, that location has a beautiful view.
It does.
It's so ironic that you've got
Don't do it. We've had tours, and I've been to the top, and the redevelopment potential is tremendous.
Oh, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you get to the top of it? I would love to see the top of it.
Don't go in it.
Don't go in it, yeah.
So,
Terrifying.
You're doing
well,
tours,
you have to know where you're stepping, because what may look like a solid floor may not be.
Yeah, that's
And
terrifying.
the last fire we had, everybody's yelling at us because you're not putting it out. Well, we weren't going to send our firefighters in. So,
Plus, you wanted to get the work done.
I know.
So, what I would say to you all, Eric and Jeff, they do a great job of making the case of the museum. It's not for the lack of wanting to do this, it really is. This year we didn't have any money other than to really give raises and do level 1 increases. We'll see what next year does. He's made a great case in terms of the positions. I'll be honest, I don't think we can do them all in 1 year. I'm asking him, when's the completion date? If I understand the completion date, how can we incrementally potentially step into this over time versus all at once?
What kind of revenue are you expecting from the hotel that they're building downtown? Oh, God. The Longmont Boutique, whatever they call it, Longmont Hotel.
We don't know. Here's what I can tell you. We know that we have a lot of leakage right now.
What does that mean?
Money leaving the community.
Why is that?
If they can't stay here.
Because they can't. So
They
They
can't
can't
live
afford-
here. People can't work and
from a
afford to live
hotel
here.
perspective, there's a lot of leakage.
I see.
So people will schedule weddings in our community at venues, but they don't stay in Longmont. They stay in Boulder.
Yeah.
And so when we looked at the data and what we were seeing, That hotel is important for a few reasons. One, believe it or not, it's been in the city plan since the 1970s. There has always been a plan to build something like that there. Two, it will start reducing some of the leakage from small events that may have it here, but then they stay somewhere else, because you really want them to stay here, because then they spend their sales tax dollars here.
Mm-hmm.
The third piece that's incredibly important with this is that we don't have a full service hotel. The market research is telling us that it'll be extremely successful. If it's extremely successful, then the likelihood of other full service hotels coming into the community goes up significantly.
What's a full service hotel versus like the hotels that do exist? You could do those.
Restaurant, bar,
Restaurant, a
all
meeting
those
room,
And
facility, yeah. Pool.
I've worked in the wedding industry, and that is very much true, is that you will always have a percentage of guests that want that 5-star hotel experience,
Yeah.
and they will stay further away in order to get that, whether
Mhm.
it's just relatives that are used to that kind of level of service coming into town.
And we really could use that here.
Yeah.
Because if they're thinking of bringing in the new movie film thing, Sundance, if Sundance we don't have enough in Boulder to provide. I mean, you
That would
really
be
need a lot. The
tremendous.
spillover could be in Longmont.
Oh, we're almost, if they get it, we're fully anticipating that happens. They did a film here once, Finding Eleanor.
They shot the film at that house on the
On Third, yeah.
Downtown. It was interesting because some of our police officers were security. Some of them stayed in Boulder, and some of them stayed in Denver, because they weren't going to stay in the hotels that we had. And so, when you think about it, we think about things systems theory. If you're familiar with systems theory, everything that we're thinking about is based. There's a point of systems theory where what are the connection points? Where is the value add? How are you maximizing your return? And this is a little bit unique to cities. How are you maximizing your revenue and your return, minimizing your expenses, but connecting everything so that we can, when we have revenue, put it into all of these other areas.
So to be concrete on action items, it sounds like Eric's done a good job of pitching requests. But in terms of what we could do to make it more one concrete thing is better outreach to sort of
better outreach
And partnerships.
And this is me operationally saying this to these. I said this to these two. Collaboration. When I got here, the budget process was like the Hunger Games. Everybody was operating out of a deficit mentality, and it was like if I didn't get what I wanted and somebody else got it, it was a full-on war. We're in a much better spot organizationally from a teamwork perspective, and I think it's collaboration, outreach, and how we utilize the existing staff that we have. It may be that it's not an outreach position that you're requesting, but he may take a position and say they're going to do outreach. I need this position then to be here, because then it's just about balancing your operational model. We can find a way to do daycare here.
I was just going to.
Licensing is a challenge, yeah.
When you were talking about going out to parks, I was wondering if the camps can do field trips, but that probably also poses licensing and permission. We've got a sketchy park. Let's bring your kids to it.
But he does that.
Okay.
And so, and don't get me wrong, we do not have a park in this community that I would say is sketchy.
Yeah. Okay.
I came from Texas. I worked in Lubbock, which is now about 365,000. San Angelo was 100,000. I couldn't say this in the community. There is no part of Longmont that I wouldn't walk down in the middle of the night by myself. And everybody talks about safety, but if
Yeah.
you've lived in other places.
Yeah.
I live in San Francisco.
It's, I mean, I would literally walk in any area by myself at 2 a.m. and I wouldn't be concerned.
That's been my experience too.
It doesn't-
I've been here for 30 years, and
Yeah.
that's been my experience.
Doesn't mean that something couldn't happen, it just means that it's not as pervasive.
Yeah.
But like, is not offering more childcare like through parks, is that being like restricted by what, return on investment? Like, summer camps through the parks sold out in one day?
Yeah. Like 4 hours.
Yeah. And that's one of the only affordable programs
Yeah.
that allows children to be outside
Yep.
in our entire community.
So you model, so what you do is if you collaborate and you go, okay, it sold out in 4 hours. So I would say to Jeff, give me a model where if you could double the size of it, what do you think your revenue is going to be on that? And if you combine it, then it gives us a chance to start looking at, okay, we can financially structure it this way.
Okay. So, but like, is that a chance where like,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they do, I think it does a field trip one day of the week.
Yeah.
So if that was to the museum, so there's a partnership within the city where they are going to
Yeah.
a place that is a cultural place, that maybe that saves budget for them.
Which the day camp does, they come for the movies at the auditorium.
And then the more you can set it where it becomes a regular recurring revenue, then we don't look at it as one time, we actually look at it as ongoing, because then you can count on that revenue stream year to year. So it's about building different revenue models within the system.
Once you have the children's ed gallery, you can do field trips there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
We also go to the library.
And I like that stuff. I mean, I've told these guys, I'm probably, one of the things I appreciate about this council is they give us the ability to be entrepreneurial. And that's rare in government. So if you think of Next Light, and you think of some of the things we've been able to do, they've been really supportive of us looking at things and trying different models and failing fast. They've generally been very successful at this, and I don't think I've met a proposal from them where I've said, I don't want to do it. My gut is, let's fund it with one time, let's try it, and let's see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll kill it and we'll reimagine it.
What kind of summer school? Is there summer school programs here? I'm just
There's-
wondering if the museum
There's,
can hook
they're
into.
in here at the museum or in Longmont?
Well, I'm wondering if there are summer school programs in the
It's
community.
through St.
whether-
Crane,
Yes.
community,
Yeah.
like
Where the
through
museum
school
can hook
district.
into some of those. I don't know.
I know that the summer schools that we provide are typically for remedial.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
building on those reading skills. So it's very, I've done summer school several years, and it's very regimented.
I see.
What we have to
Okay.
cover and what, so there isn't really a whole lot of wiggle room.
I see.
They do have, through the Innovation Center, this STEM and, different robotics kind of enrichment. So I think that would be an avenue with the proximity.
Does
But
that
the-
take place during the summer?
robot, yeah.
Or
We do
all
have
year-
some
all
programs.
year, or
We
just
do
some?
have some that are after school, but most of the things that occur are, it would be during like summer enrichment.
I see.
Yeah, because we have like our robotics teams who do competition, so they're really in their schools with their teams. So
And
it's
this-
not really.
The summer program, I think, is only during the month of June. And so parents really take advantage of that during that month. But then what do they do for July and August?
Yeah, part of August, right?
They spread your feet. Along the trails.
This help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, very
Thank you.
Very interesting. No, it's interesting, yes.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you, the other thing that bit us in the backside is when our part-time temp went from 14 and a quarter to what, 17 and a quarter now?
For recreation, our temp, our wages.
Well, organizational.
Yeah. But just the number for recreation for our regular employees and temps between 2019 and 2024, our cost for staff went up $900,000, which we can't raise fees enough to cover that, or people are gonna make other choices, or just not go for recreation.
What happened to the ice skating rink?
It's open.
It's open.
No, a new ice skating rink.
Oh,
A real one. I come
The
from
vote
New
fell.
York, I was an ice skater, I know what a rink looks like.
Yeah. The vote failed.
Huh?
The vote failed.
That was
Yeah.
back in 2019.
Yeah.
Because
See,
we
that's,
only have the indoor rink that I know of that's close by is what, down by Westminster?
and there's one in Greeley,
and, yeah,
and then
There's
one's
one on
in-
Arapahoe, right?
Yeah, the Y, the older
Yeah.
one.
Well, we used to have a great roller skating rink.
Right.
So part of,
It was a lot of fun.
so
and
part
there
of,
is a group, sorry Harold,
Go ahead.
that is trying to do that. They have nights over at the fairgrounds. You know, in the summer they use
That's
the
right, they're
pavilion
doing
over
that,
at
yeah.
Roosevelt Park. So they're trying to build that to where they can get an indoor facility, but I don't know if they've gotten there yet.
Yeah.
so part of the systems thinking, if you remember the ballot initiatives that talked about the recreation center, the library.
Mhm.
And the museum.
We did not.
There was performing arts center at the Sugar Mill. Was the third one.
Right.
You know, part of that was where it would have managed some of the challenges we have in the general fund, was that part of it was building it and also including the operating costs in it.
Mhm.
Knowing that, well, if that happens, then I have less pressure from these areas, which then creates more capacity for other areas. We obviously couldn't legally talk about some of these things, and others didn't. And it failed miserably. And it probably wasn't the right time.
Also doing all three at once is probably a turn off.
Yeah, and it wasn't the right time because we were the leading edge, but if we look at the last round in the last election of ballot initiatives, everything went down, including in Westminster, where I've never seen this in my life, a tax increase for a fire department failed. Whoa.
Wow.
Wasn't that
And-
2020?
No, that was last November. And so I just think inflation, cost of housing, and everything is at the point where people are getting hammered and they're not willing to do it. So, and we just weren't at the same point. But
That's not gonna get worse. It's not gonna get any better.
the other aspect is if we can figure something out on the sugar mill, it's not lost on me that there's not some type of performance venue.
But you're saying that with public funding?
Yeah.
No, it would be part of it, but in my mind, it's how I monetize that to then come into the fund with the SCFD funding to then generate more funding from the state. Now that's way in the future, but we're constantly trying to figure things out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Anything else?
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you.
Always happy to come back and answer questions, and I appreciate your dedication and support of the museum and what you're trying to accomplish. It's not lost on the council, and it's not lost on me. I know I didn't give you some of the answers you wanted, but my commitment is that my team, we will work to find solutions. It may not be in a year, may not be in 2 years, but definitely work toward a solution. And you all have done some great work for our community. The museum's a valuable asset.
Oh, it is.
And we just have to figure out how we tackle the beast that is our world and economy today.
Right. Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Treasurer.
Thank
Really, I should reorganize my list.
Yeah. Every time I heard something, I forward you an email from military. Okay.
I went down in my car and had to come back up.
We provided.
Have a good evening. We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, yes.
And,
I'll be back.
I was
Do you wanna
with
sit up
kids,
there?
I was.
You go ahead, and I'll just move my chair a little.
Are you
Kids
sure?
from,
Okay.
There's actually there's a seat next to
Oh,
Bruce
well,
as
here, I'll
well.
just
And take them
shimmy
on
over
one-day trips.
Sit on the other
all right.
side.
We provided
Okay,
3 to
thanks.
5 day trips. Kids 11 to 13 and 13 to 15.
Actually, I think I'll let Sheila, do you see on the power strip, can you toggle where it looks like it's power? Yeah. Maybe. Does that help?
Think of it, we can just go ahead with.
Everybody's got copies in front of them.
Yeah, we don't need anything.
Eric, do you have a copy? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
That should be okay.
Okay, we're on
No.
actually.
We'll get there eventually. It'll take a little while to warm up. Let's just go ahead from the paper ones.
All right.
Go through the.
Cool. Well, very first one, we received 16 photographs of Main Street taken in 1996 from Richard Jacoby. His wife had noticed that downtown was changing at that time and happened to take these, which is great because we do not have a lot of photos of Main Street after the 1970s. And that came from a call out at one of the events that we did. We had that filmed, and I was just like, we just don't have a lot of these photos from these decades to compare to the 40s, 50s.
Not a very good film.
They
showed it at the thing on Main Street, where that old, it's a theater.
That's true.
Yeah, that's what they showed.
It was a promotional thing. It was advertisement. Next we have 22 yearbooks from Candace Shy. She was a teacher at Northeast Junior High that then turned into Long Peak Middle School. So these are all the ones that has student signatures to their teacher. They're kind of fun. We're pretty good on high school yearbooks, but not really didn't have much for middle school. Next is an item that's been in the archive for a while, but not officially accessioned. And this is an item that I thought should be in the archive and findable in our database. It is a scrapbook from the 1940s. We do not know who made it. It begins out with a bunch of clippings from local murder cases. And then it kind of goes into, there were some floods that year. There's a bunch of things from World War II, general political issues. There's a lot about Social Security, of all things. It's just this interesting snapshot of about 6 years in the 1940s. And it's all over the place. There's some things from 1940, and then there'll be something from 1946, and then it'll go back to 1941. But it's a lot of Longmont Times Called clippings. There's an interesting one that I took a picture of. Doctors see plastic made in Longmont to replace lung tissue. And then after that, this is just a small item. We do have things like this, but we seem like a logical place, and this woman didn't know any other place that she could bring this. It is a check from the Longmont Farmers and Milling Elevator Company in 1917. So that's all our sessions. We'll do the DA sessions separately.
Yeah.
Any questions separately?
Should we move to accept them as a whole?
Let's do the accessions and the de-accessions separately.
Sessions.
All the new stuff.
So I move that we accept the acquisitions, the accessions.
I'll second. All in favor? Unanimous. Thanks, everyone. And then I have two. They're actually things that were never technically accessioned into the collection, but they have been here for a while. I did some research on both of them, and it just doesn't seem like we're the right institution for these items. The first one is a selection of blueprints and architectural drawings from the 1910s. They were the design for a building that is in Helena, well, was in Helena, Montana. It was built for J.H. Empson, who obviously had his cannery here. And the designer was G.C. Viney, who did design things in Longmont. However, this is a building that just has no Longmont connection, other than the fact that the two people who worked on it are in Longmont. I've included a picture of that building, and I found this online, and what it looks like now. Unfortunately, it was torn down. I already talked to the Montana Historical Society, and they would be interested in having these in their archive. Great. The next one is they were some rolled up Japanese characters that were likely given to city employees during a trip in the 1990s to our sister city, Chino, Japan. So, they've been here since before Eric's time. Never accessioned, and they're kind of all rolled up and squished. I already talked to the sister cities, and they said that they would be interested in having these for their own kind of institutional archive. And that's it.
Do we want to go on them separately with these sessions? How we've done it in the past?
I think we've usually done
We can do
all
it
of the accessions together, unless anyone feels like they want to split, if there's a concern.
Yeah,
about
does anyone
one.
have any concerns about wanting to keep these in the collection? Is there a movement to deaccession both of these? Is there a second on that? All in favor? Unanimous. Thanks.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, I will just hit, basically our big highlight is that we were able to raise enough money to meet requirements for going out to bid for construction on the expansion.
Sounds fabulous.
That was a big step forward. Yeah, the Friends of the Museum had an incredibly generous donation from their reserves that put us very close, and then we had some private donors that put us over the top.
That's great.
That's great. Wonderful.
So if anyone has any questions on anything else in the report, I'm happy to answer those. And I will also say, if you haven't had a chance to check out the Picasso exhibit, please do so. It's a beautiful exhibit, and it really shows the museum well.
It looks great, and I love the wall color.
I do too.
It really offsets the pieces. I really loved how that was done.
Eric, I noticed there's a few typos in some of the informational boards on the walls.
Oh.
Do we care about?
Yeah, I would like us not to have typos.
All right,
So, yeah, if you just want to send them to me, or just take photos, or
Yeah.
something, or I can certainly walk around and see if I
Yeah, I'll
spot
do
them.
that. I'll try to get back here this week.
Jared had said something about the text that came with the exhibit had some typos and issues that they were trying to catch.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of text in that exhibit. And
Is it hard to change those boards? They're kind of like post.
no, they're printed out
Okay.
in-house, and they just peel off the wall and they stick a new one up. So.
Giant stars.
I much appreciated the guidebook that you guys had posted in there, or the different books. Would that be available online, or maybe with a QR code where people could come in and get it on their phone? Because I wanted to go back and study that more in depth, but I didn't have the time right then.
Okay, I will ask about if sometimes there's a copyright issue with it, but I don't know if there is.
I thought it was interesting that so many of the works were proofs.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that before. It's probably more affordable to purchase or rent the exhibit that way. But you got to see a different side of Picasso. You got to see kind of his process.
Yeah, I think, it's a much more immediate sense of how he was working as an artist.
Yeah.
I was surprised that some of them were from when he was 9. 9 years old. So you knew that this guy was pretty talented.
Has anybody bought the pottery yet?
Has anybody what?
There's 2 pieces of.
Oh.
Ceramic?
I don't think they're for sale.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure they are for sale.
So I just was curious.
I need to go back because I couldn't find them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's any kind of that alcove.
Yeah, I'll come back and bring some people and check out.
Great. Seeing no other questions?
I do not have a report as the chair. We do have a reminder that we have a joint meeting with the Board of the Friends of the Museum on February 27th at 5:30.
That's here, right?
That's here.
Yeah, that'll be downstairs.
Downstairs? In the,
In the classroom.
The
In the
regular, the Kaiser seat.
And you said dinner was gonna be provided,
Yeah.
correct?
And you'll send out materials.
We'll have an agenda, and I haven't forgotten about sharing the Friends Board, contact info, names and so forth, just haven't gotten that put together yet, but I'll make sure you have that well in advance if needed.
And then did you have any other new business?
No?
But I do have, if you are at the city council chambers, the downstairs part, outside in the hallway where the restrooms are to the right of the chambers, the paintings that we did at Countryside Village with Arts and Public Places, along with the paintings that were done, we also had a Arts and Public Places booth at Rhythm at Roosevelt and Art Walk. And so we have those paintings up, and so I do have a couple of pictures that I took of them. But it's so cool, and that's where we did. So the younger kids did
nice,
that.
nice.
So the preschool through second did this, and then the whoops, let me go this way. This was what the older kids did.
Right.
So
That's
nice.
that's a paint by
gorgeous.
numbers.
Well, that's great.
And so we have those hanging at the
Okay.
chamber. So that's like getting out and,
Yeah.
because Ann Macca did bring materials to
Yeah.
Countryside Village, as well as Children's Youth and Families in the library. So it was that kind of collaboration.
Pretty cool.
Do we have any other board comments? Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion.
Linda, is there a second? All in favor? Unanimous? We are adjourned at 6:04.
Don't freeze out there, y'all.